Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, I got my guy Jackson Gatlin from Locked On Rockets to help us break down what Jaylen Green is going to do for the Phoenix Suns, Dillon Brooks, and overall reactions to the trade. We'll get to all that next.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Phoenix Suns. I'm Benjamin Garcia, a credentialed media member covering your Phoenix Suns. Looking for making Locked On Suns your first listen on this Wednesday. Don't forget that Locked On Phoenix Suns is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So click that follow or subscribe button to do it. Thousands, dare I say millions of Suns fans have already done. Become an everydayer and get locked on to the Phoenix Suns right here each and every day. Joining me today, I mentioned it a second ago, but why not say it again? My guy, Jackson Gatlin, who, listen, is going to be able to throw some stones my way. I went on Locked On Rockets, and I was pretty agitating. I think I shook the cage a little bit. I was begging for more. I said if Jaylen Green comes to Phoenix, I might jump off of a cliff. Some might say that was a little much, but either way, Jackson Gatlin, how you doing, man?
Excited to be here. Excited to take the high road, man, because look, we already got Kevin Durant. I don't need to throw any stones. I don't need to do much else. We already won. No, let's go ahead. Look, all right, that's the only jab I'll take.
Okay,
man. Look.
You know what? That's a really good place to start. Because you think, and I truly do think you think this, that you did win the trade. And I think regardless of what the deal is, I think if the Suns they didn't, but Jabari Smith Jr., the 10 pick, Dillon Brooks, or like whatever, right? The 2027 first round pick in there too. I think the team that gets the best player always wins the deal, at least now. Now, maybe Jaylen Green turns into something that I'm not super bullish on, but an effective, efficient scorer that could help lead this Suns team and have one of the better backcourts in the NBA. But what was your reaction to the deal? Because ultimately, once I saw the John Gambadoro tweet, who covers everything out here in Phoenix and does an amazing job. He said that the deal will be coming out today or tomorrow. I immediately stuck Shams Charania's tweet notifications on, and I just started refreshing basically. So I got the tweet immediately, and I read it. Skimmed it once. Okay, there's no Jabari Smith Jr. in here. And then I skimmed it again. I'm like, Jaylen Green, the 10 pick, and Dillon Brooks. I think it feels like too low. But everyone keeps on telling me, Ben, you are the guy wrong here. So what was your reaction to the trade overall?
Well, first off, I was hungover and I woke up to the trade 3 hours late because Saturday night was my 30th birthday. And so I woke up Sunday, like in a beleaguered kind of state of mind. And then I woke up to like a million texts and a bunch of notifications on my phone. And I was like, oh, it happened. Like, I was like, something happened. And I immediately opened, I'm playing catch up. And I'm like, so my immediate reaction was just like, okay, it happened. And I kind of expected it to be one of these frameworks. We talked about it during our crossover episode, the different kind of permutations that were kind of available from a financial perspective and how things would work. And what we talked about, from the Rockets perspective was only giving up essentially, right, 3 assets, quote unquote. And so the assets, right, in this trade were the number 10 pick, Jaylen Green, and Dillon Brooks. However you view those assets, right, that's what the Rockets were willing to part with. So I walked away thinking it was a total win. I also walked away thinking, man, like the piece that I'm most upset that the Rockets had to get rid of here was Dillon Brooks of all 3. So I think it's a win for the Rockets, and we're not going to spend much time, I think, breaking down, anything from the Rockets perspective of this thing. But I do think the Rockets certainly feel like they walked away winning this trade. They kept the 2027 and 2029 picks, which have a chance to be really, really good if things go sideways in Phoenix over the next couple years. And they got the best player, right? And that best player addresses their biggest weakness, their biggest area of need this past season, which is their inability to just get buckets at times. So I think they win.
Yeah. I would agree. I don't want to go too far into that because on Monday we did a show and we reacted to the trade once again, and I still didn't feel good about it. And I was ripped to shreds in the comment section. Apparently, I was the only one.
I just want to, Ben, I want to give you a little bit of like something to look forward to as we navigate this episode. Yeah. I've got some positive thoughts for you both about Dillon Brooks and Jaylen Green.
Thank you.
And it's not just copium, because I really, the more that I've thought about this, I think that this could be a really good situation for both of those guys. And I hope that Suns fans are going to leave here feeling a little bit better about the situation overall.
Yeah, let's start off with Jaylen Green. You had mentioned him. This is a guy that, Kevin Durant is to me what Jaylen Green is to you. I wouldn't say that you guys are on the best of friends, but Suns fans are excited about Jaylen Green. 20 points a game, the leading scorer on a Rockets team. A little inefficient from three, shot 8 of those a game. Sometimes can shoot himself out of games, but incredibly athletic. Give me the lowdown on Jaylen Green, and let's say Bradley Beal is not in the picture. It's just Book and Green, because that's what it's starting to look like right now. Give me the lowdown on Jaylen Green on why it is a plus for the Phoenix Suns, and convince me too.
Sure. So let me start with one thing that I wanted to address that we didn't have the time for me to address when we did our crossover episode. You had kind of mentioned in like an anecdotal capacity, Jaylen not really being bought, maybe being kind of a locker room issue, that kind of guy. Not the case whatsoever. Jaylen's a great kid. He's an incredibly hard worker. Everybody around him loves him, from his teammates to the coaching staff to everybody organizationally, top to bottom. They believe in him. And that's part of the reason that they would have been okay if the Suns were just like, no, you got to give us this or no deal. And they would have been like, all right, fine. And they would have walked away. And they still would have stuck it out with Jaylen Green. They would have been okay with that being the outcome. However, what happened. But when you look at Jaylen, he is incredibly hardworking, and that goes a very long way, right? It's not enough to just have talent in the NBA. You've got to be willing to work on your game. And in the 4 years that Jaylen Green has been a pro, unfortunately, 2 of those years came at the expense of the Rockets rebuilding era with Steven Silas as the head coach. Very little accountability or culture in Houston. So you almost kind of have to ball up those first 2 years of his career and just chuck it out the window, because there was no accountability, no structure, no, very little development actually took place in those first 2 years. And when you backtrack a little bit further before that, right, Jaylen Green was really big in like the AAU circuit. And then instead of going to a collegiate program for a year where he would have had some structure and like a coach to really teach him some of the fundamentals of the game and that kind of stuff, he went to the G League Ignite. And the G League Ignite, the now defunct G League Ignite, right, is gone for a reason. It wasn't a great developmental program. And so Jaylen Green, of all of the members of the Houston Rockets rebuilding young core, right, Jaylen Green had the furthest to go to understand what it meant to play winning basketball once Ime Udoka came to Houston, because Alperen Şengün played overseas in Turkey, and he's been playing professional basketball from a very, very young age, right? Not AAU ball, professional basketball with other grown men. Jabari Smith Jr. playing in college, Tari Eason playing in college, Amin Thompson playing for the Overtime Elite, although OTE seems like it's got a bit of a better kind of developmental program in place right now than the G League Ignite did. So for Jaylen, it was a big kind of culture shock, a wake-up moment when Ime came to Houston. And in those 2 years, Jaylen has grown considerably. He's grown as a playmaker. He's grown as a defender. There was a stretch in Game 6 of Rockets Warriors on the road in Golden State where the Rockets pitched a complete shutout against the Warriors in Game 6 in the fourth quarter on their own home court, where they could have been closed out in that series. And Jaylen Green was one of the 5 defenders on that court that kept the Rockets in the game. And some of his defense on Steph Curry in that series was phenomenal. Jaylen Green is by no means a defensive sieve. He's not a net negative on that end. Ime Udoka helped turn him into a positive level defender. The biggest issue for Jaylen and the Rockets, and why things ultimately didn't work out and why they elected to move on from him, is not that he is a bad player. It feels like he is miscast in his current role, or was miscast in his role in Houston. They needed him to be that 99th percentile elite bucket getter, elite scoring 2-guard, doing it efficiently at all 3 levels, getting downhill, scoring at the rim, operating the mid-range, knocking down threes. They needed all of that from him. And on the nights where they got it, he looked incredible and the team looked awesome. And he even ironed things out to where he wasn't as inconsistent, but he might not ever be like your true number one option on a legit contender. There's still a chance that he gets there one day, but he might not ever be that. But he can still be a really good second or third option. And that's what I'm most bullish about, thinking about how he could actually work in Phoenix alongside a Devin Booker, is if Book is the one taking that responsibility as the leading scorer, as the lead guard, as the primary, then Jaylen Green gets to play a secondary role off of him. Whereas in Houston, Jalen was the primary. He had to be. And except for the nights where Fred VanVleet was able to step up and like knock down like 6+ triples from behind the arc, like except for those nights, like Jalen didn't have another backcourt partner to help alleviate some of that pressure off of himself. And so I think it's less about Jalen isn't a good player and more that he was miscast in his role in Houston, and that this is an opportunity for him to take a little bit of a backseat to Booker and be that secondary perimeter scorer, have a little bit less pressure on him, and having a little less pressure could do wonders for his ability to actually thrive and flourish next to D-Book in the backcourt in Phoenix.
Yeah, thank you for the beautiful social media clip that I'm going to put out with all this to help put out the fires on Jaylen Green and his ability here. A lot of that. So you answered a lot of my questions with a lot of that, because I wonder if him as the number 2 guy can make a lot of sense with Booker. Here's the issue with that. It feels like Green is, and I mentioned this the other day, when you talk about Green, I immediately think so-so defender. Because he was on such a good defensive team in the Houston Rockets, he wasn't asked to do much. Do you worry about him needing the ball a ton offensively to really make his mark? And then as well, if he's not super active offensively, he could get picked on defensively in terms of Devin Booker, who's already not a great defender, and Jaylen Green, who I'm not so sure about because he was on a defensive team with the Rockets where he wasn't really asked to do much. Can he be a capable two-way player in this league, or is most of his work going to come from the offensive side? Because I gotta be honest with you, man, that's the one thing I'm really worried about, that this backcourt could give up 150 points a night.
So his imprint will always have to be more so on the offensive end. I do wonder what it's going to look like with him in more of an ancillary kind of off-ball role. He shot 40% on catch and shoot threes this past season, which isn't bad. That's a solid number. And he should get more of those opportunities playing alongside a talent like Devin Booker, who's going to command the basketball quite a bit more than he will within this Suns system. I think defensively, it's not that he wasn't asked to do a lot for the Rockets, because the Rockets run a 1-4 switching scheme. So there were plenty of opportunities where Jalen would get switched on to different defenders, where he would have to hold his own against some of the, upper echelon talent in the NBA, right? You start a possession with, Amin Thompson and Dillon Brooks guarding the opposing team's best player. They call for a pick, you switch the action, and then suddenly Jaylen Green has to guard Steph Curry or whoever, right? And he's able to hold his own. And I think that's an important trait to have. I don't know if I'll ever go so far as to say that he's going to be a two-way force in the backcourt, but I don't think that he's going to necessarily be a defensive liability. His biggest limitation defensively is going to be his size, right? He can get picked on by bigger, stronger players because he's only, I don't think he's probably like 190 at this point, weight class. And so that is a bit of an issue. You'll see bigger, stronger guys try to bully him, post him up, use their strength and size against him. But from a fundamental perspective, the ability to close out properly, attention to detail, understanding rotations, knowing how and when to double, working within the confines of a good team defense, he's more than capable of doing that at a high level.
Really good stuff on Jaylen Green. We didn't forget about our guy, Dillon Brooks. Jackson's going to continue to join me throughout the rest of the show. We'll get to him next. First, today's show is brought to you by Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. Listen, I've got multiple jobs in this business. It's not just Locked On. It's a normal 9 to 5. It's a billion different things going on. Sometimes things can just get a little complicated in keeping things organized. Listen, if I would have used open phone sooner, I wouldn't have had all these sorts of issues. So that's why if you have those kind of issues, you got to go with open phone. Open phone is offering our listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with your another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Just totally forgot to add my guy Jackson to it. I was patting myself on the back because Brendan normally does the ad reads, and I'm like, wow, this is easy. I could drive a show. That's what I'm doing here right now. And doing so, we got to move on to our guy, Dillon Brooks. You know, Jackson, if you would have told me, and I told this to everyone else, that the Suns were getting Dillon Brooks back in any deal, right? Just Dillon Brooks is coming to Phoenix, I'd be absolutely ecstatic. This is a guy who I've been 100% in on since his Oregon days. I actually watched him play in the Final Four. I think it was against Gonzaga in Phoenix, I believe in 2017. So he came out of Oregon a little bit older, so he's already 29 years old. I'm not so focused on what he can do. We can get into the three-point shooting in just a second because I kind of know a little bit more about Dillon Brooks. And I think Suns fans do as well. What did he mean to this Rockets team when they were rebuilding? Because 2 years ago, when they got him, the Rockets just had this influx of cash. They went and got Fred VanVleet. They went and paid what seemed to be like an overpay at the time for Dillon Brooks, but has paid dividends for them over the last couple of years. I'm curious to know what that guy was like when you were building this thing from the ground up, and it turns out he's probably not going to reap the rewards of it. But what say you here?
I'd actually argue, well, the overpay was Fred VanVleet. Dillon Brooks' contract is actually very fair value, I think, for a high level starting caliber 3-and-D wing, $20 million a year, average annual value. That's a steal to me. I didn't think that was an overpay at all when the Rockets got him. Look, when the Rockets wanted to, move into phase 2 of the rebuild is what ownership called it at the time, brought in Ime Udoka, brought in Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, Jeff Green is kind of the veteran voices for that locker room. Dillon Brooks was the tone setter for this Rockets team. He was one of the locker room leaders, and he helped instill this defense first culture that Ime Udoka wanted in Houston. He was integral in that process. He talked all the time about how much he was harping on Alperen Şengün and Jaylen Green and all the other young guys to improve as defenders, helping turn the culture around in Houston and get back to playing high-level winning basketball. Dillon Brooks, for all his antics, because the Dillon the Villain stuff is very much a real thing, but it's also very real in the sense that, kind of Kobe's Mamba mentality was real. And then Jordan, if you watched, The Last Dance, how Jordan would have to psych himself up and come up with lies about the other team to get himself hyped up to go against a certain matchup or whatever. It's a mentality, because weirdly enough, Dillon Brooks off the court is this really kind of soft-spoken, reserved, I won't say shy, but just kind of keeps to himself individual. He's a family man. He's incredibly caring. He would do a ton of community service stuff here in Houston. One of my favorite stories to tell about him, just as a person, just as an anecdote, as an aside. He loves to give back to the Boys and Girls Club. That's one of his favorite charity organizations to give back to. And one time we were at the Boys and Girls Club Thanksgiving event that he was hosting, and these two girls came up to him and they came up with a handmade sign, and they were like, "This is for you, Dillon." And he was like, "Oh, this is so sweet." He has a couple daughters too, mind you. So and he was like, "That's so sweet. I'm gonna put it in my locker." Right. And I thought he was just an athlete being an athlete. I'll put it in my locker, whatever, just talking BS to make him feel happy. A few weeks later, I think it's around Christmas time, I'm in the locker room, in the Rockets locker room, and I see the poster, and it's actually in his locker. And I was like, no way. That's actually really cool that he did that. And then I asked Rockets PR, I was like, can I take a photo of this and share it with fans? Because this is who Dillon is as a person. He is a good person. He's a good teammate. He's a guy that you want to go to war with. He's a guy that you love to hate when he's not on your team, but when he is on your team, you will want to die for him. In just 2 short years, for me personally, I'm not going to speak for all Rockets fans, but for me personally, Dillon Brooks had already cemented himself in like that upper pantheon of like Rockets role player, like legends, like Rockets lore, like just the 2 years getting to cheer for Dillon Brooks, having a part of this team, seeing what he was able to accomplish with this team, turning them around from being a 22-win team into a 41-41 team into a 52-win team this past season. He was a huge part of that. And even though Amin Thompson had kind of surpassed him as the team's kind of defensive ace on that side of the floor, Dillon was still the backbone of the defense. He was the tone setter. He was the guy that held everybody else accountable. He was one of the vocal leaders on the team. And that's going to be really hard for this Rocket squad to replace. I think they've learned enough from him that they can kind of keep the train going. But that's maybe one of the biggest losses in this trade is you lose a guy who is so important to the fabric of the team's identity. And that's the kind of guy that Phoenix is getting, a guy who will help establish a culture in Phoenix of accountability, of defense, and of winning, high level team basketball.
It's like the one thing that I was so stoked about getting Dillon Brooks here. Listen, Dillon the Villain, I understand, is totally a thing. I thought some of the stuff he did walking out on the media after going up against Braun, I didn't love that. I wish he would have faced the music there. But too many times teams would come over and push one of the Suns players and everyone would just kind of like move away. Like this Suns team could be pushed around. The next time someone pushes Devin Booker, I would love to see Dillon Brooks come over and shove someone. I need someone to get thrown out of games a few times a year to set a tone, to know that if I push over one of these Suns players, Brooks is over there to help have that guy's back. We did not have that this year. And you mentioned the culture. Like, we need that. So as much as I'm not super high on Green, although you kind of sold me on him, the Dillon Brooks thing does make it a lot better because I felt like if you were getting Brooks, you probably weren't getting Jabari Smith Jr. too. So establishing that culture is a real thing. Kind of quickly here, Dillon Brooks turned into this like sniper from three-point land since he left Memphis. He was at 30% in 2021, 2022, 32% in 2022, 2023. One of the reasons why Memphis Grizzlies got rid of him is because he kept shooting them out of games. In Houston, he's up to 36%. And then now he's up to 40%, nearly on 6 threes a game. What is Dillon offensively? Is he a true 3-and-D guy, or is he like definitely a defensive guy? And depending on the night, maybe prey.
No, definitely. I think the big part was he cleaned up his shot diet. That was a big concern when he came to Houston too, is, are we going to get these, Dillon Brooks, like CTE offensive performances, right? Where he's just decides to try to go hero ball and take over a game, long twos, pull up middies, whatever. And, that wasn't the case really at all. Like there are some nights where Dillon maybe does a little extra offensively, but for the most part, his shot diet with the Rockets was spot up threes, and then occasionally he would, attack off the bounce and drive and get to the rim, or drive. And if he got stopped, then he'd, hit like a little turnaround fadeaway. And then maybe the most important or most impressive part of his shot diet with the Rockets is, they utilized him against smaller, weaker players, because a lot of times teams like to try to hide their weakest defender or their smallest defender on Dillon Brooks, and he would punish that. The Rockets would identify that as like, okay, you're going to hide Steph Curry on Dillon Brooks. Great. We're going to post up Steph Curry with Dillon Brooks, and he just gets him right to his little sweet spot, backs him down a little bit, and then hits like a little kind of turnaround fadeaway over the top. And so he really cleaned up his shot diet and got to a point where he was really burning it from three. I mean, he was the only Rocket that was above league average from three. He was easily the team's best shooter and arguably one of their most consistent offensive players this past season. So like it really does. It hurts losing him on both sides of the floor for Houston. But then you remember that you're replacing with Kevin Durant. You're kind of like, okay, like we can get over it. But for Phoenix, right, they are getting a tried and true 3-and-D who will help establish a defensive mindset and culture, who will hold other guys accountable, and offensively who can step up and win you some games. That's the crazy part, is he's not just like a one-dimensional, just, kick it to him. If he's not open to shoot the three, he can't do anything with it. He'll take a guy off the bounce. He'll drive it in. He'll try and score at the rim. He'll finish through some contact occasionally, or he'll just get to that midi pull up if he gets denied at the paint or, in the paint. So he's got a little bit of a bag, surprisingly. There were a couple games where he looked like kind of Kobe-esque at times. Like, I'm not like saying Dillon Brooks is good, but like just like with the turnaround, like the little like shoulder shimmies, and like when Dillon gets in his bag, it's kind of an exciting thing to watch. That's all I'm going to say.
I cannot lie. I'm very excited for Dillon Brooks. We're going to continue to deep dive into this deal. Jalen, Dillon Brooks. Which one is Jackson going to miss more? He kind of mentioned it earlier, but I want to get a reason to why to that. We'll talk about that next. First, today's show is brought to you by Wayfair. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feel like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you are wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn into a space that feels like yours. Comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor spaces: conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and even the perfect string lights to set up the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. Listen, one of the things that I am very prideful of is our backyard. We don't have a big backyard. We're in like an apartment home. But if I could get some string lights out there, and one thing that we definitely need is a little patio set with potentially an umbrella over it because it gets a little hot here in Phoenix. When I do that, because I will be using Wayfair. So don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. See, listen, that time I was too worried about getting you off stage, and I'm tripping over my words at the beginning. So listen, a little humbled there. We talked about I was teasing this just a second ago, but I want to get your reaction, like obviously who you're going to miss more, but really quickly, just so I don't gloss over it. Did it hurt at all to have to give up the 10 pick? And it sounded like, according to Gambo here in Phoenix, the thing that was kind of pushed it over the top was 5 second-round picks. Was there anything to that you're like, oh, man, it feels a little much? Or were you kind of already setting this aside for potentially there's no one in the draft that you're really looking forward to? Was there anything there that you're like, that was kind of a lot, but not really?
Honestly, not really. Like the 10th pick would have been nice, and it would have been, but like the problem that the Rockets are faced with, right? And this is part of the reason why, I think Rockets fans really couldn't stomach the idea of like moving on from Jalen, is that, so many of the fan base were just like, no, like continuity, stick with it. He'll be a star one day. And it's like, well, like they've got so much young talent that they need room to grow. Like, and like Reed Shepherd got barely any time last year. Cam Whitmore's still waiting around, and Cam Whitmore could be a future star. Like, he's had some, attitude problems here and there, but like the talent is undeniable. Like I don't know. So there's the 10th pick would have been like, there were so many reports, and like my understanding of the situation is they were like, if this trade hadn't gone through, they would have looked at trading out of the draft completely or kicking the can down the road for future assets. Now things are a little bit different. Now they don't have a pick at all in the draft because Phoenix is getting the 10th pick and the 59th pick as one of those 5 second rounders. And so now reportedly they're looking at buying back into the second round of the draft because with, the apron and the cap gymnastics they're going to have to do now to flesh out the rest of their roster, getting one or two, cheap second round talents could be really beneficial for this team moving forward, but that's not the place that they were in before this trade happened. So, the 10th overall pick's kind of nothing. It
kind of feels like that, man, especially at the time where you guys are at. It almost feels like you gave up nothing because you can only have so many young guys that you're working towards. Here's something interesting, and then I'll ask my final question about which guy you're going to miss more. But Jaylen Green, just kind of going back to him really quickly, I still think the Rockets have a little bit of a scoring problem. Like, Kevin Durant's awesome, and I think Şengün is awesome. Amen Thompson, like, we think it's going to even out at some point in his offensive game. But let's say that takes another year, and the window with KD is probably this year and next year. Aren't you going to miss Jaylen Green's ability a bit to offensively keep this team afloat? Or was he just a little inconsistent at times where maybe potentially pull your hair out a little bit? Is there a guy that you saw Jaylen Green and you're like, oh, even at 22, his pro comp is, I called it Bradley Beal, like really good Bradley Beal, not the Bradley Beal we have now. Where do you see him kind of ascending? And is there going to be a hole in your offense where you're like, yeah, I'm not so sure Kevin Durant's going to be to completely fill that?
Well, I'll really quickly hit the Rockets angle of it. I think the Rockets offense is going to be fine because you're adding a 50, 40, 90 guy, and he becomes the number one offensive option. And it gives the Rockets some semblance of offensive hierarchy, which they didn't have before. They had the your turn, my turn, sometimes you, sometimes me, always us. So like on any given night, the best player might have been Jalen. It might have been Alpi. It might have been Amin. It might have been Fred. It might have been Dillon. It might have been Jabari. That's cool in theory, but like on paper it sucks because then at the end of the game you're like, okay, who's taking the final shot? And the Rockets reliably only had one guy that could consistently generate, well, two guys sort of. Like Jalen can generate his own shot whenever he wants. LP can command a double team in the post, but like that's problematic, is like because then you have to have somebody else hit the shot. And there were some games where Fred could try to take over, but it was a clunky offensive system. I think it gets a lot more cleaned up with just replacing, Jalen's 22 a game with KD's 26 a game on much better efficiency. And then you have to, then you're like, okay, well, where do you replace Dillon's production? Okay, well, Jabari can step up and be that production. You get a bigger role for Tari Easton. Maybe you've got some serious offensive firepower waiting in the wings with Reed Shepherd and Cam Whitmore. That's a serious 1-2 scoring punch off the bench, assuming that they're able to step into slightly bigger roles this next season. We've seen Cam do it before. So like, there's no question about his offensive production. It's about, can he be locked in enough defensively to pass the Ime Udoka test? So I'll stop waxing poetic about the Rockets. If your Suns fans want to come hear about the Rockets, y'all can come listen to me at Locked On Rockets.
No, it's interesting though to kind of get that from you, because to me, I'm like, the pro comp stuff I do want to get to in just a second, but you brought up something here, and I'm happy they went to the Rocket stuff. How much of Green was him and Şengün? I don't know if that fit was ever going to be a perfect marriage. And I think if there's one thing about Jaylen Green here, it's that if the Suns can get a stretch five, that's when Jaylen Green played his best ball. When Şengün was out, Bari was playing the five, and Green could get to the rim at will and kind of have more of an ability to shoot the three ball because it's not as congested.
You're gonna find there's a very small subsection of Rockets fans that will maintain till their dying breath that the issue was not Jaylen Green and that it was Alperen Şengün, that he clogged the paint for Jaylen Green and he prevented Jaylen Green from being good. But I watched with my own two eyes that Jaylen really struggled at times in isolation, dealing with the pressure of that Golden State Warriors series, dealing in isolation with Buddy Hield and Steph Curry and Brandon Podziemski. Now, a big part of that was because they had Draymond Green on the back line waiting. And so they were literally just guarding tightly on the perimeter. They were guarding him for the three ball. And that's the thing, is he needed to, and he's been working on it, seeing the offseason videos, like he's working on the mid-range game. His mid-range game took a significant hit this past year, and it needs to be better. And this is one of those things where for Jalen's archetype to really hit, right? For the Devin Booker archetype to hit, for the Bradley Beal archetype to hit, you can't have a weakness in your offensive game. You need to be able to score at all three levels, which means you need to be able to get to the rim. You need to be able to operate in the mid-range. You need to be able to hit the three ball. And you need to be able to do an array of all three of those things so that the defense can't just play you one-dimensionally. And that's what the Warriors were able to do successfully against Jalen. And why he struggled so much is, even though Pods and Curry and Hield aren't great defenders, they just had to press up on Jalen at the perimeter, not let him get to his step back three, not let him get to any of the outside shooting. And then when he did try to go downhill, he had Draymond Green waiting for him on the other side. And he kind of refused to take any of those mid-range looks, which is what the Warriors defense was giving up. And so that's kind of all she wrote. And that's why he struggled so much in that series. But remind me, walk me back to what your initial question was, because I went down that rabbit hole.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
We went down a completely separate rabbit hole.
Well, because the Alperen Şengün thing I think is really interesting, so I think people are going to let it go.
Oh, the five out spacing stuff. If the Suns get stretch big, I think there is some merit to that.
Yeah.
To the idea that if you get a team that has 5 out spacing and more room to operate, to give Jalen those driving lanes. That being said, between the two of them, between Jalen and Şengün has done more with less and has shown more with, because I mean, you can make it the same argument that for Şengün that things would be less congested for him if you actually put 4 good shooters around him, right? And the Rockets spacing issues have been abhorrent for a while. So,
yeah.
The argument goes both ways, and yet Şengün was the one who became an all-star despite some of those clunky fits offensively. So for Jaylen, I do think there's a world where with a stretch five, a 5-out spacing lineup, he could potentially flourish a bit more, have a bit more room to operate. Again, less defensive pressure being focused his way with teams having to worry about slowing down Devin Booker. So I think there's room for this to work. Like, this isn't just a, damn it, we're stuck with Jaylen Green situation for Phoenix. It's not. He's an incredibly high upside prospect. And that's why, like, there was still this optimism within the Rockets organization, top to bottom, that like, okay, we can't get KD, fine, we'll just run it. We'll run it back with Jaylen. And if that had been the case, then maybe the Rockets would have come knocking in 2 years when D Book is 30. And, if the Suns had, gone up in flames by then it's like, all right, do you want your 2027 pick back? Now you can have Jaylen Green. Like, that would have been the trade further down the line. And they would have been okay waiting for that. But now, they went the other route. They wanted the win now option of KD. So
keep your grummy little hands off of Devin Booker. You guys.
Hey, man, look, we'll come back in 2 years and we'll see about getting D Book in 2 years.
What you are is home wreckers. We are in a happy marriage, and you're coming in trying to weasel your way in with picks and money and happiness. Listen, the grass is not always greener. Really quickly, which one of these guys are you going to miss more? Give me just 60 seconds on that, and then we can close here, and then we can go over to Locked On Rockets, and you can let me have it, which I'm not. I'm actually extending this further, so I'm pushing that off.
Yeah, you're a glutton for punishment. No, look, I hinted at it earlier. It's definitely going to be Dillon Brooks, and that's not necessarily shade at Jaylen Green. It's just, I think the best analogy here is that Jaylen Green is almost like the Rockets version of Josh Giddey. And Josh Giddey went to Chicago and played out of his mind, had a great season with the Bulls, and looks to be in a better situation where the Bulls can really build something, potentially pretty nice around Josh Giddey. It just wasn't going to work with him and SGA. They weren't the right pairing. Jaylen Green wasn't the right dynamic guard to pair with Alperen Şengün and Amin Thompson. Those two guys are the future of the Rockets program. They got a win now piece in KD. So, I think that Phoenix has a chance, change of scenery, maybe a bit of a wake up call to Jaylen to realize, hey, like, this is okay. I just got traded. I'm a number 2 overall pick. What do I need to do to get my career back on track if I want to be the all-star that I think I can still be? I think it's going to be missing Dillon, though. Like, he was so important to the turnaround of this team. And it, in a weird way, it kind of feels like the Rockets did him a little dirty, because I don't know, like, the understanding was just that Dillon and Fred were going to be like training wheels, right? They were brought in to oversee the rebuild, and there wasn't really an expectation for them to probably still be big integral parts of this team when they were playing, championship level basketball again. But it sucks, like you said earlier, that Dillon Brooks isn't going to be able to see the fruits of his labor. But when I tell you Suns fans are going to fall in love with him within like a couple weeks, a couple games, I'm telling you, it's going to be pretty awesome.
When I see him, I'm just going to do the dance move that he does with the,
with
the Grizzlies.
Yeah. He was always dancing, man. Always dancing.
I am stoked for that. Anyways, man, I appreciate you coming on Locked On Phoenix Suns. I can't lie to you. I actually do feel a little bit better about the deal, which is something I need to do. And I think me and Brendan are in the minority with this deal. I think a lot of people, now I use the word casuals in not a derogatory way. I think most fans are casuals, and they didn't watch a lot of Jaylen Green, and they see the highlights and they get really excited for him. And it's kind of mine and Brendan's job to be not just watching the Suns, but kind of know what's going on around the league. And that's why we're a little bit skeptical. So our job is to bring the expert opinions to fans that want to consume the NBA in kind of a casual way, which is what makes the NBA great. So you actually made me feel better about it, man. I think every day I'm coming around to it a little bit more, understanding the value. But either way, man, I appreciate you coming on. You heard it here from Jackson Gatlin first of Locked On Rockets. The Phoenix Suns won the trade, and it wasn't close. It wasn't close. Although I think we're going to have different opinions here when I go over to Locked On Rockets in just a second. Thank you, Jackson, so much for your time, man. I'm Benjamin Garcia, guys. Thanks for turning on to Locked On Phoenix Suns, and we will see you guys when I see you again.